Now we're going to apply what we learned about the aggregate supply and demand curve to the Great Depression and World War II. Here we have our the price level, GDP, long-run aggregate supply. Keep in mind this is the natural level of output and implicitly the natural rate of unemployment. Okay. Natural rate of output, we'll just say natural output, natural Q, and natural unemployment. The aggregate supply-demand model implicitly does have unemployment here, but only implicitly. See, if we go this far, GDP increases. What happens when GDP increases? Well, typically the unemployment rate comes down. So if we go this way, unemployment's going down. If we go this way, unemployment is going up. It's going the opposite direction of GDP. And just as we have price level on this axis, implicitly we have inflation, because inflation is the percent change or the rate of change in the price level. So when the price level is going up, we have some inflation, okay? And when the price level is going down, we have some deflation. Okay, so here we are, equilibrium. There's our equilibrium price level. And we're at the natural rate of output. That's the long-run sustainable GDP. And we're also at our natural rate of unemployment. Okay, so here's our components of aggregate demand. And what happens is the stock market crashes. Okay, stock market crash. And that's going to affect consumption and also capital investment. Certainly changes expectations. And so with those two collapsing, we've got a shift to the left of aggregate demand. We've got a new equilibrium. Price level falls. GDP falls. And the unemployment rate goes up. Well, the way I drew it here is what we would have had we had just a normal recession, okay, from a stock market going down. But this doesn't quite explain what happened. This is what would have happened if the Federal Reserve Bank, and this is Monday morning quarterbacking, this is not necessarily fair, but with today's economic knowledge, we cringe when we look back and see what the Federal Reserve Bank did, which was absolutely nothing. They were created to be a lender of last resort, and they didn't. Okay, they sat on their powder. So they said they need to keep their powder dry for a real emergency. So here's the result. Let's take a look at the results. Between 1929 and 1933, okay, unemployment went from 3% to 25%. Whoops. Real GDP fell 27%. And the price level fell 22%. And the money supply fell 28%. Okay. So it was this collapse of the money supply right here that resulted in what would have been a typical recession, but wasn't. So what I drew here really doesn't capture what happened. The disaster of the Federal Reserve and the money supply made this more like this, okay, down here. And this captures it a little better. Price level, down 22%. Unemployment, down to 25%. Okay, and GDP down, okay, what I've written, 27%, okay? So that's more like it. That's what we had, a major collapse, primarily due to the money supply contracting, and that's because no lending of last resort, no lending at all. And that meant that as people panicked and took their, and withdrew their money out of the banks, the money supply through this multiple deposit creation in reverse sent the money supply downward. And when you've got a collapse of the money supply that much, the economy just can't function. So that magnified everything, okay? Now, the belief at the time was that this would ultimately correct itself. And that is true. It ultimately would have, because with this price decline of 22% deflation, inflationary expectations would fall. And over time, we would have had the short-run aggregate supply curve here respond to that lower prices, that reality of what had happened, and it would have gradually shifted its way down until it came down to here. Okay, that's the how it would have adjusted over time. And we would be back in equilibrium, just at a lower price level, okay, here. Well, John Maynard Keynes, the inventor, the creator of macroeconomics, he's the one who really saw the magnitude of this problem. And economists overall at the time thought that this process is what was going to take place. Then we didn't have to worry about it, because prices would adjust, wages would adjust, everything would be lower, and we would shift from here down to here. And the economy would be self-correcting. Well, Keynes saw that was going to take a long time. He's the first one to really put this all together and solve the puzzle of the Great Depression. He saw it in terms of a collapse of aggregate demand, all right, but that this wasn't going to self-correct or would take a long. He was asked if he'd ever seen anything like this, and he says yes, the Dark Ages, and it lasted 400 years. So and everyone would say, well, in the long run, the economy is going to be fine. And of course, Keynes made his famous statement, in the long run, we're all dead. So Keynes proposed that what had to happen was the government needed to step in and shift the aggregate demand curve to the right again through an increase, over here, government spending. And that's what the Roosevelt administration started to do. And President Roosevelt gets a lot of credit for trying new things. He wasn't much into economics. They say if he could have negative interest in economics, he had negative interest in economics. But he knew what wasn't working, and he was willing to try new things, and so he gets credit for that. But in the process of trying new things, some of the things were just the opposite of what should have happened. For example, what he got right was he needed to spend more. He needed to shift the aggregate demand curve back out this way. He never did it enough. He needed to do a lot more than he did. But what hampered it was some of the other things he did. It was like he had the economy. He was pressing on the gas and pressing on the brakes at the same time. So when the economy was had this deflation here, what had to happen was wages, for example, needed to adjust. They needed to adjust downward because everything was lower. But wages were kept high. In fact, for some reason, they thought, the thinking was that they needed to prop prices up because these prices falling needed to come back up. But actually, that hurt the economy from recovering. So the minimum wage, for example, he didn't allow wages to adjust downward to the rest of the economy. So that contributed to the lack of employment opportunities. And also, he thought food prices needed to come up. We needed to prop food prices up. And he destroyed food. He had destroyed lots and lots of food. And here we were, people are starving and they're destroying food to prop up prices. So it's just the opposite of what needed to be done. Again, the prices, everything needed to be adjusting downward. And so this short-run aggregate supply in our model would shift down. But what he got right was he shifted this aggregate demand curve to the right, though he didn't do it on a scale large enough to end the Great Depression, unfortunately. Keynes advocated much larger government spending to shift that curve to overcome all these that enormous collapse.